Anyways, fluid. So we know the kidney's job, one of the main jobs of the kidney is to balance our fluids, right? Between blood and the rest of our body. Kidney takes all of the excess and waste and kicks it out. How important is that? Well, our body fluid in females, their body mass is 50. Oh, yeah. That just totally takes away the whole dramatic thing I was going for. In females, okay, thank you. 55% of their body mass is fluid. I know, right? Crazy. But you know what? In males, 65% of their body mass is fluid. So I always knew that like women were way more solid than men. And I'm proven right here. So that is a percentage of body mass that is liquid, that is fluid. That's crazy. That's how important your fluid balances are. Okay, because if you can't balance 55 or 65% of your body mass, you're in trouble. Okay, so this fluid is found in two general areas. It is either intracellular, meaning it's inside of my cells. So if I scraped off a squamous cell right now, it would be inside the cell, or a red blood cell, inside the cell wall, right? The cell plasma membrane contained inside. Or it could be extracellular fluid, meaning it's outside of a cell. And extracellular fluid is found in two different areas. Either it is part of my blood as plasma. Remember, plasma is blood without the cells. Or in the tissues that are all over my body, and that is my interstitial fluid. Okay? So, like when we were looking at connective tissue and you saw matrix that had the fibers in the cells, that matrix would be part of that interstitial fluid. Okay? Cool? All right. So, I have 55 or 65% of my body that is fluid. It can either be intracellular or extracellular. 2/3 of that is going to be intracellular. 1/3 of this number here is going to be extracellular. And of that extracellular, the majority of it is interstitial fluid, and the small 20% of it is plasma. Make sense? All right. And here is that breakup. So over here on the left, this is a female. She's got 55% of her body mass as fluid. On the right is a male with 60% of his body mass as fluid. And then here's that breakdown. 2/3 of that is inside of cells, intracellular. 1/3 is outside of cells. Of that 1/3 that is outside of the cells as extracellular fluid, 80% of it is interstitial and 20% is plasma. Okay, that is the makeup of our bodies. That's a huge amount. It's so hard to think that our bodies are mainly liquid or fluid. Whatever. I'm the only one that thinks that's cool. Okay. So if we are mainly fluid, how is it that I can stand and walk and move things? Like, how am I doing that? Because yes, I am fluid, but it is fluid that is contained, okay? It is contained within something. Like if it is intracellular fluid inside of my cells, it's contained by the plasma membrane of my cells. If it is plasma running through my blood vessels, it has the blood vessel wall containing it. So even though I am mainly fluid, I have boundaries that hold that fluid in, okay? So it's kind of just like when you have like, they have those toys, they used to have those toys, you know, that were like squishy, like dolls, right? It's fluid on the inside, but it has something holding it together, and that's why it can stand upright and do all of that stuff. So I have things like plasma membrane keeping the interstitial fluid inside of the cells. Your blood vessel walls will contain the blood plasma inside, or blood inside of them. And then here's a little note. By the way, capillary walls are thin enough to allow exchange of water and solutes. Okay? So I can exchange between blood plasma and interstitial fluid. Well, guess what? The plasma membrane around each cell also allows movement of things, especially water, right? Remember osmosis? We talked about that. So I'm telling you that even though you are mainly fluid, you are functioning and moving because that fluid is contained within a space, either inside of a cell or in a vessel or inside of your skin. And in addition to that, all those different compartments can actually trade things with each other, okay? Because that is an important concept. So the idea that if I have something inside of this cell, I can take water from inside this cell and move it to the extracellular fluid. Or I can do the opposite. I can take fluid from the extracellular, water from there, and put it inside the cell if the cell needs it. Remember osmosis? We talked about balancing osmotic on either side. Same thing with the blood capillaries. I can take things from this capillary in this plasma here and move it out to the interstitial fluid, or I can take substances, water from interstitial fluid and move that water into the blood capillary, into the plasma. So that is really important, because the idea that I can exchange this fluid or this water from one space to the other allows me to balance everybody out. That means if my cell here is dehydrated and it needs more water, it can pull from the interstitial fluid. If my blood is dehydrated and needs more water, it can pull it from my interstitial fluids. What if the blood has excess? It can push it out into the interstitial fluid, and that's what we call swelling. That's edema. Okay, I'm getting blank faces and sleepy eyes. All right. So that exchange between those compartments happens through filtration, reabsorption, diffusion, osmosis for water. All of that allows me to exchange things from these different fluid compartments. And that's important because I need to find homeostasis all the time. So when you have an inorganic compound, give me an example of an inorganic compound. Nobody? Okay, what does it mean to be organic? Not the stuff you get in your supermarket. Remember when we did do you guys not remember AMP1 at all? Organic compounds were compounds that contained a backbone of carbon, right? Inorganic compounds are compounds that do not have a carbon backbone. A very good example, sodium chloride. This is a molecule of sodium, molecule of chloride combined. So it's a compound, right? Salt is a compound. If I take sodium chloride and I dissociate it by dissolving it in a solvent, and my solvent is water, right? These two will separate and become ions. When they become ions, I have now created electrolytes, okay? Because remember, when you separate sodium and chloride, what do you get? You get a sodium and a chloride. You've now got two ions in this solvent. Those are electrolytes. And that is essential to balancing our body fluids, okay? We have to be able to dissociate inorganic compounds in order to produce electrolytes, and then use those electrolytes to balance out our body fluids. This is why they tell you you have to have Gatorade or you have to have electrolyte water. This is also why I would tell you, you don't need to buy electrolyte water. Just take your water and put a spoon of salt in it, shake it up. You got electrolyte water. There you go. Okay. So that's a major player in how we balance it. Okay, well, how do we give our body fluids? We have to either ingest them by drinking it or eating it, or we can produce it naturally. We're talking natural. Yes, you can give it by IV, but we're talking about how does the body gain water naturally? Either ingestion. Ingestion means you drink it or you eat it. And yes, a lot of our foods, just like we are mainly fluid, a lot of the stuff we eat is made of fluid. But you just don't realize it because it's contained inside of cells. So we either drink it or eat it, or we produce it metabolically. So there are different reactions, chemical reactions that we can do in our body to give us water, okay? Now, how do we lose water? How does our body get rid of the excess water, or how can we possibly lose water and become deficient? Right. We urinate the excess, right, in urine. We can perspire it in sweat. We exhale it in our breath. And also we can excrete it in feces. So those are the ways that we lose. And I'm telling you how we get it and how we lose it, because the whole big picture is about how to balance it, okay? How not to gain too much or lose too much, how to keep that 55 or 65% of body fluids not only balanced in amount, but balanced in pH and location. Okay. Okay, so you guys are killing me. This is going to be our last slide. So over here is your water gain. So this is how we add water to our body. We could do it, about 200 milliliters are produced metabolically through metabolic reactions. We've got about 700 that we are drinking or eating, or that's actually 700 that we're eating, and then about 1,600 milliliters that we are drinking, okay? So that's how we gave our, did I make a mistake? No? Okay, that look just makes me feel like I said something wrong. Okay, that's how we are gaining water in blue. Now, what is the water that we lose? What do we get rid of? Well, our GI tract is going to lose about 100. Your lungs are going to exhale about 300 milliliters. Our skin is going to perspire about 600. And our kidneys, this is our urine, our kidneys will excrete in the form of urine about 1,500 milliliters. So at the end of the day, I've basically taken in as much as I've gotten rid of. That's how I maintain balance. Now, if there's a deficiency on either side of this equation, if I am not taking in enough, I'm not balanced, right? If I don't take in enough water, I'm still going to excrete that. I'm going to end up with dehydration. What if I'm taking in enough? I got this, but for some reason my kidneys are not working the way they should, so I'm not getting rid of enough, right? That's when I have an excess, and that's when you see things like edema or swelling or congestive heart failure. This is when you have problems with too much fluid that you're not getting rid of, okay? So that's the idea of where the fluid is, how we get it, how we get rid of it, and the importance of having those compartments balanced of what we're taking in and what we're getting rid of. Okay, so the thirst response. I know it looks like a lot, but I promise you it's super simple. The whole idea is that the thirst center is in the hypothalamus. There are things that will trigger the thirst center to initiate that response. And once it does, it is going to make you feel thirsty, and that is going to cause you to drink water, and then that should reverse all of the things that cause you to be thirsty in the first place. So let's talk about what can cause you to be thirsty. Increased blood osmolarity. To me, that kind of means increased saltiness in the blood. So your blood is salty. Your blood's salty. You have osmoreceptors that detect that saltiness in the hypothalamus, and they will stimulate that thirst response. Decreased blood volume. So let's say you have a patient who has bled extensively and now the blood volume has gone down. That is also going to trigger a thirst response by being detected in the atria by the volume receptors. So we have receptors in the atria of the heart. Remember the left and right atrium? They're there to detect the blood volume going through them. Once it's decreased, they're going to fire off, go to the hypothalamus, and then again, you'll have the whole thirst initiated. Decreased blood pressure. So whenever your blood pressure drops, we have baroreceptors throughout our vessels that are there to detect a drop in pressure.
A drop in pressure is going to initiate the same thing as a drop in blood volume. Again, it'll go to the hypothalamus, initiate thirst. You'll increase your water intake because you're thirsty, and then those liquids will be used to replenish blood volume and blood pressure. The kidney will also react to that low blood pressure simply by detecting the flow of blood coming in through that afferent arteriole. When that pressure is reduced, it's going to secrete renin. Renin's going to go in and try to increase that blood flow. Or actually, here, angiotensin 2. And then also dry mouth. Anytime your mouth is dry, that's an indication that your mucous membranes are unable to secrete enough liquid to keep them lubricated and moist. That'll do the same thing. It'll initiate a thirst response. You're going to drink more liquids or water, and then that should reverse everything and take you back to homeostasis. Cool? Okay, good. All right. So we know that we will ingest, eat, drink, or produce as much liquid or water as our body needs. And then whatever excess we have is going to be eliminated by the kidneys through urine, right? Okay. The amount of salt in our urine is going to have a huge bearing on the amount of fluids overall in our body. And the reason is, whenever you lose those electrolytes, sodium and chloride in urine, water is going to tag along with it. Okay, it's just one of those things. Wherever the salt goes, water's going with it either way, and it does that by osmosis. So what our body does is it controls the amount of fluid lost simply by controlling the movement of sodium and chloride. So if I need to lose, if I have too much water in my body and I need to get rid of some of this fluid, then there are mechanisms that will cause those tubules to take that sodium and chloride and excrete it with urine. That way the water goes with it, you've reduced the fluid amount. Make sense? If I'm low on fluids and I need to retain some more fluid, then we're gonna block it and try to keep the sodium and the chloride in the bloodstream so that the water stays in the bloodstream so that we end up with a higher fluid volume and less urine. Make sense? Okay. So there's 3 hormones that are controlling my sodium and chloride at the kidney level. What are they? Please make sure you know these. Angiotensin 2, aldosterone, and atrial natriuretic peptide, also known as AMP. Let's talk about angiotensin 2. So whenever your blood volume is decreased, meaning fluids are down, so we need to retain, the juxtaglomerular cells are going to secrete renin. What does renin do? Well, the liver had produced something called angiotensin 1. That is an inactive form. It's going to come out of the liver cells and then be activated by turning into angiotensin 2. Well, what does angiotensin 2 do? It is going to decrease your glomerular filtration rate. If I decrease the rate, that means I'm decreasing the filtrate, I'm decreasing the urine volume. I'm able to retain that fluid in my blood stream. Make sense? Yes? Okay. And in addition to that, angiotensin 2 is also going to stimulate aldosterone from the adrenal cortex. Well, what does aldosterone do? Aldosterone is going to cause sodium to be reabsorbed. What does reabsorbed mean? It means going from the tubule to the blood vessel, right? So when I take sodium out of the tubule and put it in the blood vessel, who's going to follow? Water. So again, I've increased my fluids and blood. So these two right here, angiotensin 2 and then aldosterone, which is secreted because of angiotensin 2, these will both increase the volume, okay? Make sure you know that. What about my atrial natriuretic peptide, or my AMP? AMP is the one that will be secreted by the atria, which are in the heart. Remember the atria? It's called atrial natriuretic peptide. Anytime blood volume is increased, AMP comes out from the heart. What does that do? It stimulates the kidney to produce more urine, right? When you produce more urine, you have decreased the volume of blood and fluids. Cool? Wake up, Sean. Okay, so we have two hormones that are meant to help increase our fluid retention or blood volume, and we have one coming from the heart that's meant to decrease it. Okay. So all three of those work on sodium and chloride. There is one hormone, one major hormone, whose job is to work on water. And that's why it's unusual, because it doesn't control sodium or chloride. It controls water permeability in the tubules, and that is ADH, or the anti-diuretic hormone. The name is anti-diuretic. A diuretic makes you lose water. Anti-diuretic makes you retain water. So ADH increases the water permeability in the cells of the convoluted tubule, allowing that water to be reabsorbed into the blood supply, right? So again, ADH is going to increase your blood or fluid volume. Are we good on these? Because these are important. Okay. And then we have a little summary of those, the thirst and the hormones. Okay. So that's what happens when we look at dehydration and adjusting the amount of our fluid loss or retention. Is it possible to drink too much water? Because I thought water was a good thing, right? They always say drink water. You're not drinking enough water. I can't tell you how many times I hear the word or the statement, are you drinking enough water? You need more water for everything. I have a headache. Did you drink enough water today? I'm cramping. Did you drink enough water today? I'm going to die on this treadmill. Have you hydrated enough today? Right? We all hear it. It's always drinking enough water. Can you drink too much water? Yes, you absolutely can. There is something called water intoxication. It's happened to you? Oh, right. It is crazy, but kind of, sort of, but not, because you can get water intoxication by drinking too much water. Water alone. No, you have. There you go, right there, living example. Oh yeah, where people keep drinking. Yeah, I know a dog like that. Professor Robinson, if you have his class, ask him about his dog. For sure his dog has that, because his dog will drink water to the point that he gets sick. You have to like put him, you have to like get him away from the water bowl, like stop drinking. Yeah, that's an imbalance with the hypothalamus and the thirst. Yeah, and the thirst center. And the problem is not in water itself. The problem is that you're taking in water without the electrolytes, without the sodium and the chloride. And that's what causes the imbalance. And the reason it does, and I went ahead and pulled this from AMP1 for you guys right here, this lovely picture, just to remind you what happens, okay? Because I'm tired of saying stuff like, remember in AMP1, and everyone look at me with blank faces. I'm like, okay, I'm not even gonna rely on remembering. I'm just gonna put it back in here so we can realize that, yes, you have seen this before, you have looked at this before, and we're coming back to it because AMP1 and 2 are related, I promise. So let's take a minute to look at this picture on the bottom half of the slide. An isotonic solution, what does that mean? It means the amount of sodium, I'm just gonna make little N's for sodium. The amount of sodium chloride in this solution is the same as what's in that cell. What does that mean? It means that I'm at balance. I don't have a salty cell or salty solution. So water is equal on both sides. Well, what happens if I put this cell in a hypotonic solution, meaning there's more salt in this, in this cell than there is in this solution? Well, water likes to move with the salt, right? It wants to be equal. So the water ends up going into this cell, trying to equalize or lessen that saltiness of the cell, make it as little saltiness as the fluid. The cell ends up swelling up with this water, and it can go to the point that the cell actually explodes because it's trying to decrease that saltiness. What if I put it in a hypertonic solution, meaning I have more salt in this solution than I do inside of the cell? Well, then the water that's inside of this cell is going to want to go outside in order to make the solution less salty. And then it ends up drying up and dying. So this basic concept of movement of water to equalize saltiness on both sides of a membrane happens throughout our body. So if you are taking in just water in huge amounts faster than your kidneys can filter through it and try to get rid of that excess water, you're going to end up putting your cells in this situation where you have all of your fluids way less salty, right? So then your cells appear to be saltier. So then all that water that's in your interstitial fluids is going to gush into your cells and cause them to swell and maybe even rupture and die. Make sense? Okay. So that is why you can have water intoxication. It causes swelling of your cells. It, consumes water faster than the kidneys can excrete it. The important thing is this is water, not water plus electrolytes. And do you have to go spend $8 on a bottle of water to have electrolytes? No. Put a spoon of salt in it. There you go. That's electrolytes. For real. Remember? Sodium chloride dissociates in water, and when it dissociates, it becomes sodium with a charge and chloride with a negative charge, and that's an electrolyte, both of them. Okay. So that's why they made something called Gatorade, which I wish I had invented Gatorade because the dude's probably like a billionaire by now. But all it is it's colored water with some sugar and some salt. Yeah, pretty much. All right, so let's talk about those electrolytes and what's important. I do expect you to know all of these. Sodium. What's important about sodium? It's the most abundant cation in the extracellular fluid. That's important. We use it for things like signal or impulse transmission in your neurons, muscle contraction, and to balance our fluid and electrolytes. Chloride, major extracellular anion. So in my extracellular fluid, I have sodium and chloride. Sodium is a cation, and chloride is my anion. Remember, cations are positive charged, anions are negative charged, just for your information. So what do I need chloride for? Well, in addition to my balance, I also use it to make hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Potassium. Yes, potassium is important. It's my most abundant cation in the intracellular fluid. So inside of my cells, I need potassium. So I have sodium and chloride outside. Potassium is the major one on the inside. Again, I'm going to use it to balance my fluid volumes. I'll use it for impulse conduction, muscle contraction, regulating pH. Bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is very, very important. It's found in plasma. And bicarbonate is one of the major ions that we use to balance pH in our buffering systems, which we're going to talk about later on in this slideshow. Okay, calcium. Calcium is my most abundant mineral in the body. That is important. I need it obviously for things like bones and teeth, but I also need it for blood coagulation, neurotransmission, muscle tone, nerves and muscles really do need calcium. It is important. Magnesium. This is my intracellular cation that I'm going to use for things like activating enzymes and also myocardial function, transmission in the central nervous system. Okay. And there's a chart with all of those in summary. Oh, right here, your bonus. Sorry, I didn't mean to skip over that. Okay, on this chart, this is what you're going to see for the bonus, and I think this is important because I want you to know these terms. This is stuff you're going to see if you're working in a hospital or in a clinic somewhere. You have to be able to recognize the term hyponatremia or hypernatremia. So obviously hyper is a deficiency or low. When it comes to hyponatremia, it's low sodium. Hypernatremia is elevated sodium levels. So please make sure you know these terms and be able to match them with the electrolyte that it goes to, okay? Chloride is hypochloremia or hyperchloremia. Potassium, hypokalemia or hyperkalemia. Calcium, hypocalcemia or hypercalcemia. There was oh yeah, here's a typo. There's a typo here, and this is straight from the book, y'all, but look at this. Phosphate, this is hypo, not hyper. Hypophosphatemia or hyperphosphatemia. I guess I have to write them an email or something, let them know there's a typo in their book. That's bad. I'm sorry. I don't like that. That really bothers me. Okay, hypophosphatemia or hyperphosphatemia. And then magnesium, hypomagnesemia or hypermagnesemia. Just be able to recognize those, whether it's hypo or hyper and which electrolyte goes with it, okay? You should, by the way, know that hypo means low levels and hyper is high levels, please. Okay, so let's talk about acid-base balance, because after all, that was the title of the entire unit, right? Acid-base balance, and from the beginning, everyone's like, what is acid-base balance and why are we dedicating an entire lecture to it? And I've condensed it a lot. Let's talk about it. So the pH of our blood should range from 7.35 to 7.45, okay? That is optimal pH. That's where we need to be in homeostasis. If you go above it, you become acidic. If you go below it, you become alkalinic, and either one is no good, okay? So in order to keep this range, we have different systems set up. One of them is going to be our buffer systems. We'll also have the kidney excreting hydrogen ions. And then we also have exhalation of carbon dioxide. So the buffering systems all over our body, along with the kidney excreting hydrogen and the lungs exhaling carbon dioxide, those are three ways that our body manages our acids and our bases, or maintains that pH range from 7.35 to 7.45. Wake up, Josh. Come on. We're almost there, man. Almost there. Just wait. Stand up if you have to. Okay, so buffering systems, I do expect you to know, I'm not saying know all the details, but understand the four buffering systems. That there's a protein buffer system, hemoglobin in our blood acts as a buffer, there's a carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system, not the first time you've heard of it, by the way. We talked about it in AMP1. And then phosphate also acts as a buffer. And we're going to go look through those real quick here. So protein buffering systems, this is what happens inside of our cells. And really, whenever we're talking about a buffering system, the idea is if you have an acid that you need to neutralize, you throw a weak base at it, and it becomes a weaker acid, right? And then the opposite, if you have a base that you need to neutralize or you need to make it more acidic, you throw a weak acid at it, and that shifts it over to the other side. Most of the time when we're talking about buffer systems, it's about taking a part of something, as in proteins, we can remove this COH group, dissociate it, and that acts as an acid. Or if we need a base, we can dissociate our amine group, and that will act as a base. I don't need you to know these formulas. I don't need you to worry about that. I just need you to understand that we have a protein buffering system in which we can break or dissociate parts of a protein and use it as either an acid or a base, depending on what we need. Okay, hemoglobin in our red blood cells can also serve as a buffer for our red blood cells. It's actually the most important buffer for our red blood cells. Ooh. And you can look at this if you want. If you get bothered by it, it's okay. Carbonic acid bicarbonate. This is the buffer system that you talked about in AMP1. Again, it's going from a weak acid or a weak base. And the cool thing about this system is it can go either way. All you need is a bicarbonate ion and a hydrogen ion to create carbonic acid, or you can break apart carbonic acid into a hydrogen ion and bicarbonate. So this is infinite. It can go either way. Okay. Phosphate. Phosphate can also act as a buffering system between dihydrogen phosphate and monohydrogen phosphate. Again, goes back and forth. Okay. Carbon dioxide. So that was all the buffering systems. Now we're talking about, we skipped one, the hydrogen excretion by the kidneys, because we've already talked about that when we talked about the kidneys, right? Hydrogen is an acidic thing. So let's talk about carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide can be mixed with water and form carbonic acid. So because of that, we're going to consider or think in our heads of carbon dioxide as being the acid in this. Okay, it'll make things a lot easier when you think about it. So when you exhale CO2, you actually are losing acidity. Okay? When you retain CO2, you are gaining acidity in your body. That's why we like to think of CO2 as our acid. So, if I have somebody that is losing an excessive amount of CO2, let's say they're hyperventilating, so lots of CO2 is getting out, will their body be acidic or alkalinic? Right, because they're losing acid. Right. That is what we call respiratory alkalosis. The opposite of that. If someone is unable to exhale this CO2, it's being retained in the body, then your fluid and blood become acidic. We call that respiratory acidosis. So in general, acidosis is anytime your blood pH falls below 7.35. Alkalosis is anytime the blood pH goes above 7.45. Now, whether a patient is in acidosis or alkalosis because of a respiratory fault or something else, we call that metabolic. That's how we define that acidosis or alkalosis. So respiratory acidosis means I am in acidosis because of my respiratory system. And if I know that CO2 is the acid and I'm in respiratory acidosis, that means I am retaining CO2. So, right. So what can cause me to retain CO2? Number one cause that's going to cause your lungs not to function the way they're supposed to, COPD, right? COPD is what? Yes, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, right? And the obstructive in that is not you choked on a piece of cookie or whatever. No, obstruction happens at the level of the alveoli. They're unable to exchange gases, so they can't get rid of the CO2. They can't take in the oxygen. A low respiration rate. Low respiration rate will put you in acidosis because you're not exhaling the CO2. A high rate would put you in alkalosis because you're getting rid of a lot of CO2. But it also means you have to be in a high rate or a low rate, but the alveoli and everything else is working. If only the rate is changed, right? Make sense? It's about losing the CO2. Exactly. Yep. So that's why when you're hyperventilating, you see, like, I don't know if they still do it, but we don't have paper bags anymore, but they used to give them, like in the movies, they give them a paper bag to breathe in. So what's happening? Instead of losing that CO2, you're breathing it back in, right? So you're trying to stop that alkalosis from happening. You're trying not to lose the CO2 so you can retain that acidity so you don't go into respiratory alkalosis. Make sense? So respiratory acidosis, I'm retaining CO2. The lungs are not getting the CO2 out. So that can happen either because that breathing rate has slowed down really badly, or because the lungs are unable to exchange those gases and CO2 is not leaving your system. And the opposite is true for respiratory alkalosis. Okay, we're getting out too much CO2. Okay. Now, basically the same kind of thing can happen metabolically, but metabolic acidosis or metabolic alkalosis have a variety of things that can cause it, okay? This could happen because you have a diabetic or someone who's on a keto diet. They're gonna have ketone bodies, which are acidic, running through their blood. That puts you in metabolic acidosis, right? So those, we don't have to know what causes them, but just understand that metabolic acidosis is blood that is acidic due to something metabolic. Either we have one of our organs that aren't functioning right, the kidneys aren't doing their job or doing it too well, or there's some other byproduct of a metabolite or something that's in our bloodstream that's causing it to be acidic or alkalinic. Okay, cool. And there is a summary of all of that. Okay, and then here you've got, if you are curious about acidosis metabolically, you things of like diarrhea, ketosis, renal dysfunction, and then metabolic alkalosis would be excessive vomiting, because remember, when you're vomiting, you're losing all of that hydrochloric acid from your stomach, right? So you're losing a lot of acid from your stomach, that's alkalosis, or diuretics, drugs. There's certain drugs that make you alkalinic. Okay, and that is it. So let's go through our PowerPoints. Ooh, and I'm gonna highlight some stuff. This is gonna be quick. I don't recommend that you try to take notes. I mean, you can, I guess, if you have them all in front of you, but I'll go ahead and do this one that we just did. Y'all, this whole thing is important. I can't tell you enough how the whole thing is important. Get a highlighter here. Like, I reduced so much of everything, for real. You should know the compartments of your body fluids inside and outside and know what this means and what that means. You should know this, how we gain water, how we lose water. Definitely know the definition of dehydration. Know that the thirst response is in the hypothalamus. I think these two here are important. Okay, your hormones, this entire slide, everything on it. Can't stress it enough. ADH, all of those hormones you should know. Water intoxication, you should know. The electrolytes, sodium, chloride, potassium, bicarbonate, and calcium. You should know, understand this, and then all of this. And then for the buffer systems, just be able to know where they are. All these and this. And then you need to understand this whole idea of exhaling carbon dioxide and this entire slide. See, that was easy. Okay, told y'all it's going to be everything. All right, let's go look at the urinary. Man, these glasses make my head hurt. Urinary. There we go. Okay. I don't even have to say, but you should already know this, just saying. Definitely know the kidney functions. Know that they're retroperitoneal. Definitely know what the hilum is. Know all three of these. You already know the cortex and the medulla, so make sure you know the pyramids and the columns. The blood supply, we already kind of talked about what to know here in this series. Okay, definitely know what a nephron is and know the anatomy of a nephron, all of it. The renal corpuscle, you should know this. When you know the anatomy, you'll know that. And all of this slide here. Filtration membrane is very important. Cortical nephron, know that they're the majority and where they are and what kind of urine they produce. Juxtamedullary, know where they are and what kind of urine they produce. Know the juxtaglomerular apparatus. You should recognize that name because we used it later on. When it comes to glomerular filtration, know this definition. And then know the three things that determine glomerular filtration. Oops. And then know the regulation of it. Autoregulation, neuronal, and hormonal. Especially that auto. Okay, when it comes to reabsorption and secretion, make sure you know the roots here and then know what happens where. So everything on this slide here. Know all of these. Okay, and then we had the second one, second urinary. Going backwards here. I don't think there was a lot in the second urinary one. You guys, if you have any questions, this is a good time to bring them up if something on here was something you didn't understand, okay? Yes? Yeah, go for it. I would probably understand that. You should already understand that. Definitely know what this is. You should already know the anatomy. I'm hoping you already know that. And then know what this is. I would know the differences here. Everything on here. Know all of these, especially these. Pyelonephritis. Okay. And then that takes us to the GIT. Where am I? Oh, here. Okay, so okay, when it comes to the GIT, you should know what the GI tract is made of. That's super easy. It's where the food goes, and know what the accessory structures are. I'm sure you know all this already, right? I hope. Okay, when it comes to layers, we already did that in lab, but things that we didn't focus on, you should know. like the myenteric and the submucosal plexus. Make sure you know that. Submucosal secretions, myenteric is motility, and then you already know these. Peritoneum, know the layers, know the cavity, and then know the folds, all 5 of them. You know, you should know what this is. Xerostomia. You don't remember that? Deficiency of saliva? Okay. You should know it. You should know it. Okay, when it comes to different parts, we're going to learn make sure you know these are 2 important ones because this one's active until it's in the stomach. This one's activated by the stomach. Amylase is for sugars. Lipase is fats. And then when you go to the esophagus, this is kind of cool here. That's important. You've got 2 sphincters. Let's see. This here. Okay, and then when we start going to the stomach and the other organs, I want you to make sure you understand the function of it and then the cells and what they secrete. So all these cells, what each one does. Don't worry about this one. And then same thing for the other organs in the GIT. Go to the second one here. This is important. Okay. Again, functions, and then when it comes to the cells, you should already know that, but when it comes to the cells, make sure you know which ones do what. And then this is important here. That and that, and you already know that it's controlled by myenteric. What is digested in the small intestine? Remember, this is the main digestion that happens in the small intestine. So when it comes to these enzymes, you should be able to recognize what they do. Anytime you see a lipase, it's going to be a lipid. Anytime you see a aminopeptidase or a peptidase, any peptidase is going to be proteins. And then carbohydrates are named after the carbohydrate that it breaks down. Okay, all of this right here. All right, you need to know carbohydrates are absorbed as monosaccharides, proteins as amino acids, short fatty chains can go by themselves, long fatty acids will need to be converted into micelles or covered in micelles by bile salts, and then inside the cell they're converted to triglycerides or broken down into triglycerides and then are coated with chylomicrons to go into lacteals. This whole thing is important, especially this part here, okay? Like, I can't stress it enough. Okay. Just saying. I would also understand this part too. Okay, not much going on in the colon, but again, you want to know those. And then this is kind of important to understand. And then this bacteria is basically what's happening in the colon. So again, make sure you know the functions of that part. I would go ahead and do these for sure. Okay, and then understand what makes up feces. Okay, so again, we have an organ. We want to know what its functions are, like it produces enzymes, sodium bicarbonate, and it empties into the duodenum. And then when it comes to the liver, what's the function of the liver? What's the function of the gallbladder? There we go, functions of liver and gallbladder. Okay, all 3 of these, know them. These are important. I wouldn't have put them there if they weren't. Should be it. I think that's it. Yep, that's it.